Okay, well, thank you for the welcome, and good afternoon, everyone. So there's been a bit of an intro there already, which we will do a bit more about who we are, who the company that we work for is. We're going to talk to you, as the slide says, about multi-module implementation, and we'll get into the guts of what that means, and we're going to bring it to life. We've got some learnings along the way that we'll share with you. But I also thought, so I unfortunately couldn't be here until lunchtime just gone, and so I've barely met anyone in the room, so I thought I'd open with a couple of jokes, which is always quite risky. And there's a reason behind this. So clearly part of this conference is about technology. And so embracing the summit's ethos, therefore, around technology, I thought I'd use ChatGPT to help me out. So has anybody used ChatGPT or equivalent generative AI? Couple of hands. Anyone for jokes? Right, okay, so putting myself out here. Manage your expectations. You probably don't need to hold on to the size of your chair. So let's start with, why did the compliance professional get a standing ovation? Because they knew how to follow the rules and really complied with the audience's expectations. It's not great, is it? The really bad news is that's the best one of the two that I've got. The other one that I found was, why did the compliance officer bring a smartphone to work? To ensure they were always in technical compliance with the latest regulation. I mean, that barely makes sense, let alone being funny. So there's a reason behind this. What we learn is that technology doesn't make a boring guy funny, but it can help with regulatory change management, and we'll talk to you about how that's going to be. And so before I bomb like a father of the bride trying to be funny, we'll crack on. So, as it said on the previous slide, I'm the head of compliance, which is a second-line role at Nationwide Building Society. My colleague Sarah will introduce herself in a moment. She's got some operational risk-based gags for you.
I have.
And so we work for Nationwide Building Society, and there's a slide coming up which will say that we're UK retail financial services focused, for those that don't know us. I realise it's international audience. We are a building society, and so for those of you that don't know what that means, we are customer owned. So for those of you that are UK based, you'll have seen things like our fairer share, where it's essentially a shareholder dividend that gets paid into customer current accounts. So we differentiate ourselves from the other UK financial services firms accordingly. In spite of all that, as you can see from some of the words on there, we are sizable. So we've got 272 billion in assets as at the end of the last financial year, a 2 and a bit billion underlying profit last year. So, and as it says on there, we're the top 3 mortgage lenders within the UK. So we are sizable, but very different to our financial services peers. And that's a bit of info about the company, but what we do unfortunately also share with any big firm, including in financial services, is we've got ongoing work, I guess it would be fair to say, around our data, around our technology infrastructure, around our architecture and systems. And risk and compliance is no different to that. So I joined Nationwide in 2021, and I was asked to, as part of my new role, to implement a regulatory compliance tool, which we're going to talk to you a bit more about today. Luckily, when I arrived, my colleague Sarah had already done a lot of the hard work to sort of set the platform for us. So I'll let Sarah introduce herself and then talk a bit more.
Thanks, Phil. So for those of you that saw me earlier, I'm sorry if I'm repeating myself, but I'm Sarah Harmon. I've worked at Nationwide for 24 years, so as Phil said, I've worked there a little bit longer. Only 20 of those years implementing MetricStream. That was my operational risk joke.
There you go.
Okay. So yes, in the last 4 years, I've been implementing MetricStream, looking after the system, and I'm also responsible for the operational risk framework. And those two, as I said earlier, go hand in hand together. So we're very conscious of keeping the two things together so that they align completely. So what I'm going to talk about is the GRC programme. So this is the programme that was led back in between 2018 to 2019 into early 2020 to implement the operational risk app onto MetricStream in our first module of MetricStream. And here's some of the things I touched on earlier that I can give you a bit more detail on. So, and these were for us, where the success came from. These key things are what led to the ultimate success, and I think it's really important that we talk through, and I've had a couple of conversations since this morning with people that it really resonates with, so please do ask questions at the end if you need to know a bit more, but business-led, not IT-led. I had a team of 6. They all reported into me. 5 of them were risk professionals. They come from either the first line, the second line. They had a bit of tooling knowledge from using it, but predominantly they were risk people. They knew how this risk tool had to work. I had one IT chap. He was total fish out of water, but he worked really well with us. But we needed that to make sure we had a support model for when it landed, making sure we were ticking all the right boxes. But that was really, really important from a business readiness perspective, because 80% of that whole project was getting people ready for this tool to land. 20%, because we stuck to out of the box, which I'll touch on a bit more, was the technological aspects of it in terms of how it looked, what the configurations were going to be, what an incident would look like, how it would feel for a user from a risk assessment point of view. But all those decisions, when we were making those, were all based around how would it feel for the end user, how is this going to look, how is it going to feel, how easy is it going to be, rather than how many boxes do we need, how much workflow is there, how many people touch it, all that kind of stuff, albeit very important. So we didn't have requirements, we had very little requirements. Obviously we needed enough to get the tool, but what we certainly didn't do is mass workshops of requirement workshops with first-line people for them to just throw in, I need this box to do this, I need a drop-down to do this, I need business service line over here, without any concept of what that would actually mean and what it would actually look like. It was solving their problem without them having to do the thinking through. And I adopted an analogy, which was, we are building a vanilla sponge cake here. We will not have sprinkles. Sprinkles can come after, but we need to build the foundation of a risk tool. We are not just throwing loads of sprinkles on it. So I'd have people come up to me and say, oh, can I have this? And I go, no, sprinkle, not happening. And they become quite scared of that. So that didn't happen. Zero customization. So that is what I started out with, and I tried to stick to it so hard. But there's always going to be compromise. And the one example we had from a user functionality perspective was Nationwide's very customer-centric, as it should be. And in the incident impact form, it didn't have a member impact that we could record off the back of an incident. It only had like financial impacts, and that was something we couldn't compromise on because we have to be able to report our customer impact. So that was the customization. It was soon made upgrade safe, but that was customization. But I think we had one on the user, literally one customization on user functionality, and we had some in the background for my team on upload templates, but it didn't impact the user. Validation, not approval. So we're very conscious that we'd built it as our team, and we were very aware of what it needed to look and feel like. But what we didn't want to do is then open it up and go, what do you think, guys? To the first line for them to go, I don't want it, I don't want change, I want to stick with the old tool. So we weren't going to do that. So we got a group of people together, influential people, across the first line, and we said, we're going to validate. You're not approving it, we are going to validate, but we just wanted to make sure that fundamentally we weren't missing anything. So we did a few workshops, and we probably come out with about 15 extra small configurations off the back of that, but what that then meant was actually they were bought into it, those people could go and they could sell it. As part of business readiness, we had like MetricStream champions, and we got them loads of merch. So they had a book, and they had a cup, and they had a pen, and they went to some really nice hotels to have, as part of the training rollout. So we could rely on those people when it was launched, if there were some defects or teething issues, to go, it's okay, look at your cup, and remember that you really like this tool. So that worked, and we still talk about them now. 3 years on, we still say, oh, she was a MetricStream champion, she'll know. So that was really helpful as well. What that led to was a tool that ultimately now is our single source of the truth for risk data. Phil's going to talk a bit more about how we added compliance, how we're adding compliance data on in the Reg Change app, which means we're going to be a single source of the truth for compliance and risk data for reporting to our boards. Relationship-driven data model. This is really cool. So this is where we can do things like, you've got your risk assessment at a function level, yeah, you add your controls and you tag a process. So you tag one of our key processes. And then what happens is the process owners can slice and dice that information and have a look at all the controls and how effective they are on their process. So you can slice and dice it by policy, by function, by risk category. There's all these different lenses. So that's really useful too. And then ultimately, reliable data, reliable decisions. We can make reliable business-leading decisions off the back of the data we're seeing, but at the same time addressing control weaknesses as we go along. So that's a bit about the implementation of the GRC platform. We'll save questions to the end, and then I'll move on. Hand back to Phil.
Thank you. So hopefully this is a thread that people can follow, in that what I'm about to talk about in terms of the regulatory compliance tool, we're very much building on the kind of basics and the platform that had been put in place through Sarah's hard work with others. And so what I'm about to talk about was made much easier, and hence why we're calling this the sort of multi-module implementation of how we built essentially on some of the learnings, but also a lot of the successes of what Sarah and team had achieved. So just so we're all on the same page of what we mean by a regulatory compliance tool, every firm will have different phraseology for some of these things, but all of our regulatory change alerts come through this tool. So we were previously using sort of law firms and other feeds that we could get into an email that would be then put into manual spreadsheets and various documents that we could then operate. And we were operating effectively, which I'll talk about in a second, but it was cumbersome, right? And so once that then happens, we've then got all of our regulatory footprint. So basically, and luckily we're UK focused, and I think there's probably other firms in here that have a far broader burden than we do. But even so, within the UK financial services regulation, there is heaps of stuff to make sure that we've got an ongoing live look at what we comply with. Again, we had that in EUCs, in spreadsheets, but we didn't have it all in one place. And then clearly there's compliance assessments on the back of it. So how do we know how we're doing against that regulation that we're supposed to? And so having a record of that. Again, it's not like we were creating that from scratch. We had it, but that was in a different spreadsheet. So what we aspired to do and have achieved is have that whole life cycle in one place. And so that's given us, and this wasn't the reason we did it, but it's given us some resource benefits across the organisation. But really crucially, and the point that I'd try to make most clearly, is it's given us that reliability. So we can, and with everything that Sarah said just there as well, we've got that single source of the truth. We've got that one place in the organisation to go. There are a number of us that can look right across the whole portfolio and see where the status is on any one given day. And that's something that we just didn't have to hand before. We would be searching through shared drives and SharePoints and that kind of thing to get to it before. So we had it, but it wasn't as simple as it might be. And obviously the reason we're here is that tool is supplied by MetricStream. We've got fourth-party help through Cube, who you've heard from already just in the previous helpful session. That's our fourth party that sort of provides that regulatory data, and that's ultimately into the MetricStream platform. So we launched in May 2023 with this regulatory compliance tool. So this time last year, I was here talking about our implementation that was in flight. We have reached it. And so there was a lot of graft by Sarah, by her colleague Ben, who's in track 2 at the moment, by Marco, who was here and I think left as soon as I started making jokes, but from MetricStream. So, and he was really helpful as our kind of relationship partner on it. Switching to the slide. So we've called out effective governance, and it's a bit of a no-brainer. There's not really going to be that much education in that statement, really. But right through the organisation, from very senior people right the way through to ourselves, we made sure that we had really tight governance structures in place. Occasionally there are escalations to make sure that things that needed to work differently did, but also it was a classic case of making sure that we kept our sponsors on board and in line with what we were trying to do. But that governance also, of course, had to include right across the organisation. We are just a compliance function of 20-odd people. We needed to make sure that we were taking the whole of the first line with us that was going to be impacted by this. And so you are talking hundreds of people across the organisation that needed to be brought in on this journey and ultimately supportive of it, whilst, of course, we kind of took challenge and build along the way. That engagement was essential, and the third and fourth party engagement was essential. So again, mentioning Marco, but a lot of his colleagues at MetricStream, and a lot of our fourth-party colleagues at Cube, making sure we had people around a virtual table to be able to do that. The frequency, the depth, the personality of that engagement and collaboration is, needless to say, absolutely essential. As far as internal support was concerned, we essentially made sure that we had the Chief Risk Officer and the Chief Controls Officer right behind this all the way, so you've got second line and first line represented there that sort of really drive this from the top. This is why we need it, and this is why it's a good thing, and this is why we all need to get behind it, even though there's millions of other things to be focusing on. But if I talk about the challenges as well, because let's be honest about it, no project goes kind of swimmingly all the way through. So from an internal perspective, being honest, and there's a lot of firms would be in a similar position. I've already mentioned we kind of had everything in place. It's not like we were getting red audits and regulatory findings about you've got a really big problem with how you're managing this stuff. We were in okay shape. So there's that temptation when you're that busy with millions of other priorities of just saying, well, there's nothing wrong, so what's this going to do for me? And so we had a bit of a sell on our hands, I suppose, to make sure that people could still come with us, even if it was a case of strengthening, continuing improvement, rather than, yeah, it's always much easier, isn't it, to jump to a burning platform and let's go rescue it. Sarah's already touched on this, and this will be a bit of a theme through the next 10 minutes or so, but did we make the process fit the system, or the system fit the process? And so we had numerous internal debates across various things. Sarah was very educational in her view. It had to be the former. You make your life so difficult, and I took advice and learnings from other people that had been on similar journeys when I was here this time last year, of how you make the processes fit the system. So it might not always feel perfect, but generally it makes your life so much easier. And frankly, a lot of these processes is just kind of internal creations. One of the other challenges that we've called out on the slide is around, and this would be true if however many extra parties you had and whoever you used, but having a fourth party does add complexity to it. I'm not going to shirk from saying that. Everybody here will work with fourth, fifth, sixth parties. We know how complicated that is. We've got a good relationship with our fourth parties, and we know that the third party does as well. But needless to say, there's that added complexity the more people that you add into the relationship. But for our ambition, it was always necessary to do that. We didn't want to sort of do this kind of halfway house just because it was easy. We didn't purposefully set out to make life difficult for ourselves, but we knew that to achieve what we had to do, we knew we had to eat the frog, so to speak. So, and then the other challenge, this hopefully was idiosyncratic, but so we trained everyone, we had all the right roles and responsibilities lined up, everyone in the right place, and then we did an internal restructure 11 days before launch date. So a lot of head banging, a lot of screaming, but that might have just been me, and a lot of how do we work through this. So again, any project managers in here, prepare as well as you can for the unexpected, build in your flexibility as well as you can, because you never quite know what's around the corner. If I move on, so one of the other pieces that we wanted to talk about was business readiness. So Sarah and Ben, who we've already touched on, had kind of lived and breathed a lot of this already. The thing I learnt most from them that I would have sort of made mistakes on my own 2 feet were around the importance and how vital business readiness activity was. So we knew we had a good product. It was well designed, it was fit for purpose, it met our expectations of what we needed to achieve. We tested to the nth degree, but it would have fallen on its face without that business readiness activity. Making sure that we've got all of those parties that I've already mentioned on the same page. When are we doing it? What are we doing? And how are we going to do it? And being honest about where we might have some limitations along the way as well. That business readiness and making sure we had sort of sandbox environments for people to play in, making sure that we had all of these optionalities around training so that people could kind of do it their way. That business readiness activity is the kind of number one thing that I learned and that I'd love for people to take away. We also were doing this in a hybrid environment. So as a firm, we're still in a hybrid working scenario, some people in, some people at home, and everybody coming in every so often. But it meant that our training, therefore, had to be hybrid as well. So we did the vast majority of that virtually, which means that you're chasing people virtually to attend the training. What did they get out of the training? What did they learn? What do we need to do differently as coaches and trainers to help with that training? And similarly with a sandbox. So it is not impossible on Teams to say, I need help, but it's not as easy as when somebody's walking past your desk. And so we had that battle to face as well. And look, I'm not going to educate on that front. We're all probably dealing with it or have dealt with it. But it did work on hybrid. We made it work, and with a lot of thought and effort on our part, but also our participants. I've mentioned senior engagement. I won't trip over that again, but that was absolutely essential for us and helped us. And showing the right amount of flexibility. So whilst we've talked about process or system, what flex is, there is some flexibility that you need to have, of course, both within the second line, with our first line colleagues, with our suppliers. There are some things that are up for grabs in these conversations where you can sort of, there's a bit of grey around the edges and we can sort of make that work for our purposes. And so getting that right degree of flexibility is probably an art rather than a science, but I think that was absolutely crucial for us. So we learnt from those that were involved in the first implementation, like Sarah. There were, as Sarah said, loads of successes. We knew there were things that we could not make the same errors on as well and make sure that we could use the benefit of that experience around us. And the other thing, just before I hand back to Sarah, that for us was a really key partnership, which again won't be breaking news for people, but helping the first line. And I say that deliberately because it wasn't natural to them in terms of it was largely a second line led project, but we knew it was going to impact that first line team in great detail, helping them to jointly implement with us. So collaborating and cooperating as far as what that ownership structure looked like, making it feel like a really joint effort between first and second lines. And of course, what that then means 5 months later is, taking the credit each way for between first and second line, but also where we're currently working through, and Sarah and I were talking about it outside about an hour ago, where we've got some things that maybe could work better, some things that we've learned about the way that we've engineered some of the processes, making sure that that problem's shared as well. So all of that really comes back to business readiness, which I've probably done to death, so I will hand back to Sarah.
Business readiness. It's all about business readiness. I get the exciting bit of the benefits. So I won't read all these out because I think we've covered most of them as we've gone through the benefits of doing things. But ultimately, the automation of the process, I think the compliance assessment process particularly was very manual, wasn't it? There wasn't a tool at all. Mm-hmm. So actually, that automation of process was a big win. And it gives the user an improved user experience. Consistent application of compliance and risk assessments. This is where we were in dark rooms between our two teams for a long time in terms of where are we going to tag them? Where does a compliance assessment trigger a risk assessment? Or does a risk assessment trigger a compliance assessment? And how do they link? And how do we draw those relationships? Because they're slightly different, but they're risky and they're the same. So we've now got to that point, and we're on the process of embedding that, I would say, in the first line now. But you get that consistent application and that drive to single source of the truth for compliance and risk together. And I'm sure if we implement more modules, it'll be single source of the truth for all those additional things as well. And then you're building those data relationships all the time. Alignment of taxonomies and libraries. We've heard about it a lot today. I've been in a few sessions where, other areas like third-party, information security, technology, financial crime, they're all special. We know they're special, but they are also operational risks and they have to follow the same taxonomy and then they can do some extra stuff. So we take a lot of time, talking them through that, but we're forced to align every time a new module comes on. They have to adhere, they have to adhere to the same risk categorization model, and they have to align completely. So that's also a big win. And then ultimately a greater insight into the risk and control environment across the society, across both compliance and risk. So we're still in the process of embedding the reg tool. It was May. We don't say it's going to happen overnight. And like Phil was saying, we were just saying we've got some teething issues. We need to, make sure that First Line are using it properly as much as they do the GRC tool, so that MetricStream itself, keeps its reputation as the tool. So I think that's all I was going to say. I think it's a question. question slide, and we've left, I think, 6 minutes, 19 seconds for questions. So any questions?
Thank you very much. It was a very interesting presentation. I also looked at your previous presentation with the journey from 2020
Yes.
to 2023. You also mentioned that at the beginning you didn't allow to give any sprinkles.
Yeah, no sprinkles.
Okay. Now, my question is, especially in the first phase when you come with the MVP or something to the business and you don't bring any sprinkles, how you manage the expectations, how you keep the fire burning, how you keep the excitement of the end users?
Yes.
Or there are no sprinkles from the beginning?
Yeah,
Thank
so
you.
the users are very excited by a simplified process, but I would say we have sprinkles now, actually, and that was the key point. To get that tool live and to get people using it and to get used to it and to like it, it had to be simple and it had to be the basics. But we have a platform change forum, MetricStream platform change forum. It runs every 6 weeks, a weird number I know, but it works well for change cycles. And the first line can come along, or the second line, anybody, or the third line, come along and say, you know, we want to change, there's something I've seen that we want to add to the tool, and then we talk it through. They have to come with a business case, they have to come with everyone behind them, because the last thing we want is that one area over here really needs something in the tool. So we put it in and it only works for one area, and therefore your data relationships just fall because it's only being used by one area. So then we have a collaborative kind of conversation. And I always say, well, you know, you need a process behind it. We're not just adding a box. We're not just adding a drop down. So I think people do get excited by the MetricStream platform change forums because they can bring those sprinkles. So I would say 3 years later, yeah, we've added a thin layer of sprinkles, I would say. And the RCT module being a big fat candle on the cake, probably.
Yeah,
So,
I think that's
does that answer your question? Any more?
Sorry, just before you say that, the other thing I meant to say in my intro and I forgot is if this plants a seed and you want to talk more to Sarah and I, either afterwards or LinkedIn and that kind of thing,
Yeah.
please do reach out. But sorry, on with your question.
Yeah, so as you've gone through that change over the last 3 years, as you've gone through that change for the last 3 years, did you just know from the implementation project kind of what you'd be able to change in the system and what you wouldn't, and still be kind of aligned to the out-the-box kind of no issues with future upgrades sort of position, or have you consistently engaged with MetricStream to make sure?
Exactly that. So it's a really good point. I think the functionality over the last 3 years, there is more scope to add change that is upgrade safe. So stuff that we wouldn't have been able to implement when we were looking at it in 2018, 2019, has now become upgrade safe. So we always have the conversation, which is we've got a CR request. We work with MetricStream, they come back and they say it looks like this. They don't even come back with anything that's a customization because they know we'll say no. It's not even out there, but they will say, like, this is a complex, but we've made it upgrade safe. So every single element of our tool, both RCT and GRC, is completely upgrade safe. We'll find out when we upgrade, but that's the rule. That's what we've been told now. So, yeah.
And just to build on that then, so do the people who come up with the change and want those changes
Yes.
in the business, they kind of just accept, is it accepting a line that, you know, that's customization, so we're not going to touch it, or do
Yes.
you go to depth with them and get them to even potentially recognise that they're not going to request change X because they know it's the wrong path?
I don't think they'd always know, but there's always a compromise. So I don't think we've had anything that's come to the MetricStream change forum and we haven't been able to do something. Like, it's never been an absolute no. It's normally naming conventions and stuff like that, you know. So, you know, risk owner in the system is actually the risk partner. I had a massive issue with that because risk partners aren't the risk owners, but it's just something they got used to. But actually at the time it felt massive, but it's not. We all know the risk owner, it actually means the risk partner, and it's accountable exec that's the risk owner. So but changing some of the naming conventions on the platform like that is a customization, and it's not worth it. But there are always, I would say, I don't think anyone's come to the only time they've come to the MetricStream change platform and asked for something goes against framework, and then it's nothing to do with the tool. It's like, you want to change in framework. That's not happening. So don't try and squeeze it in from the tool, which helps that we do both. But I don't think we've ever said a flat no. There's always been a compromise, whether that's through guidance or offline. I don't think it's been a no, never. And MetricStream are pretty good at helping us with those as well. So I don't think there's anything we fundamentally miss because it's a customisation.
All right, great, thanks.
All right. Any for Phil?
We'll park it there.
Lovely.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.